Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Vicki Goodman, and on behalf of the Friends of the Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior at UCLA, the Resnick Neuropsychiatric Hospital Board of Advisors, and WOW, the Wonder of Women, it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's Open Mind program with Robert Kolker, author of the New York Times #1 best-selling nonfiction book and Oprah Book of the Month Club pick, Hidden Valley Road, Inside the Mind of an American Family. We are honored to have Bob Kolker here with us. He's zooming in from his home in Brooklyn, New York, and he will be joined in discussion by Dr. Stephen Marder, who is a professor of psychiatry and biobehavioral sciences here at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA, and he is the attending psychiatrist at the Psychosis Clinic. Dr. Marder is a world-renowned researcher whose work focuses on the treatment of schizophrenia and the pharmacology of antipsychotic drugs. We are also very excited to welcome Lindsay Galvin Rauch, who is the youngest sister of the Galvin family. She is zooming in from outside the beautiful Telluride, Colorado, to be with us here. And she's going to talk about her personal experience growing up in a family with severe mental illness and her role now as mother, mental health advocate, and the sibling who has taken on the responsibility for the medical care of her brothers who live with schizophrenia. So for those of you who are new to the Open Mind, this is our lecture and film series that brings together thought leaders in science and culture to present programs about mental health issues as a free public service to the community. Until the coronavirus era, these programs were held in person at UCLA, but due to the challenges of social distancing, which we are all facing now, we quickly pivoted to this virtual platform so we could continue to bring our programs to you. The silver lining here is that now we're able to welcome people from all over the United States who are interested in learning about mental health issues. And today we even have people who have logged on from Canada. So welcome, everyone. Hidden Valley Road is an extraordinarily crafted and riveting family saga of a picture-perfect mid-century military family, the Galvins, Mimi and Don, who lived on Hidden Valley Road outside of Colorado Springs with their 12 children, 10 boys, and their youngest girls, Margaret and Mary, that perfectly spanned the baby boomer years. The oldest, Donald, born in 1945, and the youngest, Mary, who now goes by Lindsay, in 1965. 6 of the boys spiral into the confusion and chaos of schizophrenia, while the other 6 live through the trauma and terror and worry that they could be next. Author Robert Kolker masterfully unfolds the drama of the Galvin family's fate over decades, while intricately weaving in the story of how science has struggled to treat schizophrenia. With great compassion, elegance, and humanity, Robert Kolker lifts the veil on the world of severe mental illness, one that is all too seldom exposed because of the stigma and the shame often associated with it. Now, before we begin the program, just a few housekeeping tips. Not housekeeping tips, but housekeeping suggestions for Zoom. You've all been set to mute, but you will have the opportunity to ask questions of any of our discussants after the program. For those of you new to Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you will see Q&A. If you type in your questions there, we will take as many of them as possible as time permits. If your question is for one specific discussant, please note that, or if it's a question for everybody, please note that as well. And if you'd like to share your name, that would be great. And if you don't, that's fine too. I also want to let you know that this program is being taped. So if you want to refer people to it who have not been able to participate today, or if you want to refer back to it, it will be housed on the Friends of the Semel website and should be posted in just a few days. So now we are honored to welcome Bob Kolker, award-winning investigative reporter, and in addition to being the author of Hidden Valley Road, he is also the author of the New York Times best-selling book, Lost Girls, that was chosen by the New York Times as one of the 100 most notable books of 2013 when it was written. So Bob, we first met on Twitter when our Open Mind Committee heard about your book and went searching to find contact information for you. This was immediately after Oprah announced that she had chosen Hidden Valley Road, a nonfiction book, which is very unusual for Oprah, as her April Book of the Month pick. I had to laugh out loud at your comment at the top of the page, which said, "I'll be glad to talk rationally about this once I get up off the floor." That must have been such an exciting moment for you. Can you tell us how you got this news and what it meant to you and to the Galvin family, who bravely shared their story with the world through your book?
Well, first of all, thank you, Vicki, and everyone at the Semel Institute, and Dr. Marder, and Lindsay Rauch, who we'll hear from later, for being a part of this event. I'm just thrilled to have a chance to talk about the book. I was amazed, and it was completely unexpected. My phone rang, and it was from an unknown caller, so I didn't even bother answering it. And then it took a call from my publisher to tell me to please answer my phone the next time an unknown caller came in. But when I heard Oprah Winfrey's voice, I knew it was her. She sounds exactly like herself. I didn't think it was a prank or anything like that. And I just started laughing because it was so completely random and unexpected. So many of the books that the book club picks are fiction. And so it was never on my radar. I didn't go to bed at night while working on Hidden Valley Road thinking that perhaps Oprah would pick it. But, and then I was puzzled about why, but then it became clear why. I learned that mental health is important to Oprah, that she has done many programs related to it and was planning another one when this book came across her desk. And then when I talked to Lindsay, who was probably after my wife, the first call to let her know that this was happening, she said the greatest thing, which is that when she and her siblings were kids watching Oprah's show, they used to say that the people on Oprah's show had nothing on them, that they were way more interesting than the people on the show. So it but I very quickly got serious on the phone there and told Oprah Winfrey just how meaningful this was going to be for the Galvin family, who really took a huge gamble in speaking with me. Every living member of the family cooperated for this book, which made it sort of unique. There are wonderful memoirs about mental illness out there, and many of the authors of those memoirs have been a part of Open Mind events in the past. This book seemed automatically different in that I had a chance to talk to everyone and stitch together everyone's memories to make it read more like an omniscient narrative, like a novel almost. And so I tried my best to do that here. And for it to get chosen for the book club was really an exciting affirmation for them. I was really happy for them as well.
Bob, are you up for a short reading from your book? For those people who haven't had a chance to read it yet, I'm sure they would love to hear a little excerpt.
Sure. This is from the prologue, and it might offer an overview a little for people. The dozen children in the Galvin family perfectly spanned the baby boom. Donald was born in 1945, Mary in 1965. Their century was the American century. Their parents, Mimi and Don, were born just after the Great War, met during the Great Depression, married during World War II, and raised their children during the Cold War. In the best of times, Mimi and Don seemed to embody everything that was great and good about their generation: a sense of adventure, industriousness, responsibility, and optimism. As their family grew, they witnessed entire cultural movements come and go, and then all the Galvins made their own contribution to the culture as a monumental case study in humanity's most perplexing disease. 6 of the Galvin boys took ill at a time when so little was understood about schizophrenia that the search for an explanation overshadowed everything about their lives. They lived through the eras of institutionalization and shock therapy, the debates between psychotherapy versus medication, the needle in a haystack search for genetic markers for the disease, and the profound disagreements about the cause and origin of the illness itself. Some of the theories behind those disagreements could be especially cruel to the parents, who often took the blame, as if they'd caused the disease by something they did or did not do. The children who did not become ill were in many respects as affected as their brothers. Being a member of the Galvin family was about either going insane yourself or watching your family go insane, growing up in a climate of perpetual mental illness. Even if they happened not to descend into delusions or paranoia, they felt as if they were carrying an unstable element inside themselves. How much longer, they wondered, before it would overtake them too.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. How did you first hear about the Galvin family? And I'm curious, what drew you to write a story about a family dealing with severe mental illness?
I have an old friend, a longtime editor of mine, back when we both were at New York Magazine. His name is John Gluck. And John went to high school with Lindsay, who we'll meet later, and we'll be hearing from her later. When they were in high school, he didn't hear much about her family. She wasn't really, talking about her family and her past was the last thing she wanted to do at the time. But as the years went on and he got to know her and her sister Margaret, he kind of got the gist of the family story. And then one day in 2015, they reached out to him and said, "We've been talking for decades about the best way to let the world know about our family. It's not just what we've been through, it's how we've been studied by scientists. And we think now the best way to do it would be to hand it to a journalist who can really investigate the medical records, interview us all, and come up with something that's greater than the sum of its parts." And he immediately thought of me because I was the right match, in that I had written about families in crisis just recently with my first book, Lost Girls, which is really about 5 families who are all sort of on the edge and dealing with many different, not only psychiatric, but sociological and economic problems. And everybody's story was different. So he thought that I would be right for it. And it really is the thing that motivates me most about journalism. While other people are, I think, want to be investigative reporters or pundits or write about politics or the arts, I really like writing about ordinary people who are going through something extraordinary. And I like doing it in a sort of sensitive and intimate and non-judgmental way, so that you really walk in their shoes. And I have a lot of models for that, a lot of wonderful nonfiction authors before me who I'm trying to be like when I have that approach. But I got on the phone with Margaret and with Lindsay and heard everything, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It wasn't just that 6 of the 12 children had schizophrenia. It's that there was sexual abuse, and there was murder-suicide, and there was molestation by clergy. There were interesting and strange subplots, one sibling going to live in a commune, another being brought out of the family and inserted into a very wealthy family for a while. It was very hard to get my head around. And it also all seemed so very sad. But the thing I remember most from that conversation is that Lindsay and Margaret were not sad on the phone. They were excited to be able to tell their story, even the parts of the story that involved them going through some of the worst moments of their lives. So I was very encouraged by that. And I thought that here was a chance to do something that could really add to people's understandings of mental illness.
Well, you certainly accomplished it in this book. I'm wondering, was there one question? First of all, it was amazing that every single member of the family participated, and that's extraordinary. And then I'm wondering, was there one question that you began with? And if so, were you surprised by any of the responses that you got from any of the family members?
I had 2 tracks in the beginning. The first was motivated by the question, how could all this happen to just one family? And with that, I was talking to not just the researchers who studied the family, but also other people who were specialists in the field up and down the East Coast and everywhere else. And trying to get the lay of the land and to see how the Galvins fit into the larger understanding or lack of understanding about schizophrenia, because it's so not understood. But then the second question was, how did the family even stay a family? And sure enough, I heard from researchers that in most cases, a family like this would never have stayed together. And so that became the question that I would ask most often to Lindsay, to her sister Margaret, to Michael, to Mark, John, Richard, and all of the surviving siblings. And which was, you could have left at any time and never come back. You could have maybe sent a Christmas card every couple of years. You could have changed your name and never been part of this family again. And no one would have faulted you for it. There was a lot of very, very difficult things happening to you as a child, things that you could have blamed your parents for and divorced yourself. Why come back? Why be a part of it? And what brings you back? And I've really lost count at the number of times I asked that question and found different ways to ask that question. And what I loved about the reporting of this book is that everyone's answer was slightly different from one another's. And so I got to really get complex answers at how different people handle essentially the similar situations.
Well, you did such a marvelous job of sharing each family member's perspective and memory, even though they all had a slightly different memory of certain incidents. And it's extraordinary that you were able to bring that each with such sympathy and compassion and understanding. You really did a beautiful job doing that. Can you talk a little bit about Mimi, the mom, and what struck you about her, and I know you got to meet her before she passed away in 2017. So what were your conversations with her like?
Sure, I'll answer about Mimi, but just to add on to the question of reconstructing different things about the past. I was needed in great, most of my conversations were with the sisters, but also Lindsay was of enormous help in tracking down medical records that helped really nail down when certain things happened. As you can imagine, there's things that happen in the family that they sooner wouldn't remember. And so it was hard to say to them, so did that happen in 1972 or 1974? I wasn't going to get an answer like that. So to get the medical records was really crucial. And then Margaret had very detailed diaries about her childhood and her teenage years and into her 20s and 30s. And so that helped get the flavor a little bit about what it felt like in real time to be her in the family. So that was helpful too. Mimi was my first conversation after the sisters. She was about 90 when I talked to her, and 91 when we finally met. She was frail physically, but very sharp and completely with it, and very, very happy that the book was happening. And what I learned later is that she was not always that way. She was resistant to it for a long time. And my guess about what changed was that some new information had come from some of the researchers who had been studying the family for decades. And there was a lot of confirmation that this was indeed a genetic issue with the family. And that made her feel better, made her feel less judged, less attacked. Certainly she was a mother of schizophrenic children at a time when half of the field was blaming mothers like her for creating the illness. So she didn't want to relive that. So she was very cheerful and very excited, but also I think her children would be the first to tell you she was a natural at deflecting any unpleasant conversations. And so it took a lot of help, mostly from Lindsay and Margaret, to help steer her back to some of the more difficult conversations about how she felt in danger in the house sometimes, and how she was made to feel ashamed by many doctors, and how difficult it really was and why she wanted to keep everything secret for so long until she couldn't anymore. Thank you.
Your heart goes out to her when you're reading the book, because you wonder, was she in denial, or could she just not accept the theory, because of the theory at the time being the schizophrenogenic mother, and blaming the mother, and how do you cope and carry on knowing, with that kind of blame and being shamed about it. I thought, there was moments where you're just so sympathetic to what she was going through. So I thought you did an extraordinary job of bringing that out, and also showing the picture of her. There's one scene in the book that really stood out to me where she's making Thanksgiving dinner and she's in the kitchen baking pies, while in the dining room, one of the brothers is throwing a table at the other. And that scene was so vivid when you wrote about it. And, so you just, your heart went out to Mimi in many different ways, as a mother especially. Could kind of feel her torment and denial. So you just did an amazing job of bringing that out.
The goal here really wasn't to have heroes or villains in the book. I was especially aware that a lot of people like to blame mothers for things, even if they're not schizoprenogenic mothers. And so on the one hand, she may have made a lot of bad calls at a time when she had very few choices. On the other hand, who on earth would have been prepared for a moment like this in 1968 or 1970? And so I had to include that perspective as well. I think perhaps a lot of the people who are in on the Zoom call today might have this experience with their families where you have a choice, where you either medicalize the situation and sign away your child's life essentially to a parade of treatment options, none of which are very, very good, or you cross your fingers and hold your breath and hope that maybe they'll grow out of it, and you hope for the best. And I think that was the decision early on that Mimi and Don faced, and they decided to hope for the best. And they, of course, had no way of knowing just how many children would get sick and what would happen next.
Thank you, Bob. I think this is a perfect segue into welcoming Dr. Marder. Thank you also for being here with us today. And I'm just wondering, hearing about how the mother was blamed in the 50s and 60s, and there have been so many different theories about schizophrenia and so much different research. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how the treatment and understanding of schizophrenia has changed over the past 50 years.
Sure, Vicki. Right now, and again, it's been 50 years since the oldest brother, Donald, got treatment. And you kind of see how the field has changed. First of all, treatment now is usually done in different kind of approaches for different times of the illness. So Donald began to become ill while he was a sophomore in college. There were clear signs of a developing illness. Now at UCLA and most places, there are specific programs for children who are considered either prodromal or at risk, where there are early signs of the illness. If rather than a treatment setting where the families would feel blamed, bringing the family into treatment, and that's not just the mother and the father, but siblings as well, would have happened. They would have been educated about the risks of developing the illness. They would have been talked about how to set an environment that most helps their child develop. When shortly after a couple of years, it became clear that Donald was psychotic, that he was, as you read the book, he jumped into a fire, he probably took an overdose, he just his behavior was very disturbed. And probably at that time, he would have entered a program for people who are early in the illness. Now the treatment philosophy is to front load treatment, to be more aggressive during the early stages. Treatment would have been focused both on the family, it would have been focused on having people help him stay in college, helping him to kind of continue in the trajectory that he was and preventing disability. Treatment of his psychotic symptoms would have been aggressive in that one would bring him to a kind of steady state where the symptoms are resolved, so that he could explore the origins of his symptoms, that he could have understood his illness better. None of these things happened. As I read the book, as he went into hospitals, the family felt more alone. They felt isolated from the treatment of their child, and they were just not informed about the illness. During when Donald was first treated in the late 60s, from the records, Bob, it wasn't clear what doses of medications he had, but I suspect at that time they were extraordinarily aggressive, using very high doses. And during that stage, I think they would have been much more modest in doing it. They would now. The treatment would be used with more modest doses. They would include psychotherapy. They would help him explore the origins of his psychotic thought processes with treatments that are effective. And of course, later in the illness, when he began to develop severe health problems associated with the illness, I think they would have monitored those carefully as well. So you could look at a whole series of effective interventions that unfortunately he and most of the brothers never received. And sadly, even though I've described what I think is better treatment, not every patient with schizophrenia is able to receive it. Let me stop there.
Okay. Well, I'm curious. Treatments have improved, it sounds like, but I'm wondering, with the treatments now, do you feel that people who live with schizophrenia have a chance of going on to lead a meaningful and successful life? Or do you feel that we're not quite there yet with our treatments? I know there are some very successful people that live with schizophrenia, but they seem to be the exception and not the rule. So I'm just wondering how you see things now.
Well, the lives of people with schizophrenia, vary remarkably from those who have relatively complete and fruitful lives who meet their goals to those who are just chronically ill and have a poor recovery. The real question, as I see it, is if people had the proper treatment at the proper time, how many of my belief is that a substantial proportion of them would have done much better. I feel more optimistic about the treatments for schizophrenia now, particularly when one combines kind of not just drug treatment, but psychotherapies, things like supported employment, being able to keep people in school, preventing the kind of discouragement and loss of motivation that happens as people begin to fail early in the illness and kind of withdraw and accept an image that they're disabled for life. So when a family comes to our clinic with schizophrenia, I think we could usually say with proper treatment, the likelihood is that they'll do reasonably well and that they'll be able to return to work and school. At our first episode in program at UCLA, more than 80% of people are able to return to work or school with the proper treatment.
Well, that certainly sounds very hopeful. As a parent, especially if you have a history of mental illness in your family, what advice would you give a parent if sometimes it's very hard to distinguish between teen normal behavior and teen behavior that is starting to might have concerns about. And I'm just wondering what advice you would give parents if they are starting to see some signs that might be confusing to them.
Yes, I mean, teenagers provide, they behave oddly sometimes under the best of circumstances.
Right.
So it's a real dilemma. The problem is that on average, there's about a year between the time that a young person with develops psychotic symptoms and the time that they actually receive treatment. Substantially more than a year. So getting people into treatment early is important. And one of the strongest predictors of a person doing well is getting early and effective treatment. So I understand it puts parents in a dilemma, but I think if behavior seems particularly odd, if there are experiences which seem to show that the person is being divorced from reality, if there are things like hallucinations or odd thoughts, children who are with a change in personality, where a child becomes more, or an adolescent who is outgoing and involved becomes more withdrawn. Those things suggest that that person should be seen by a mental health professional relatively quickly, and that mental health professional should in turn take that seriously, and if the person needs treatment, to get it for them as soon as possible.
Thank you. And if they're fortunate enough to live somewhere near UCLA or one of the major medical centers where there's excellent treatment available. Dr. Marder, the book suggests that two of the brothers died from causes related to their psychiatric medications. And there's certainly been a lot of controversy about antipsychotic medications, both for schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. What do you think are the potential dangers and health problems associated with taking long-term psychiatric medications?
Right. Two of the brothers died of heart disease. One of them was on clozapine, and one of them was on another drug, which I think was unclear from my reading of the book. First of all, this is a major problem. People with schizophrenia, on average, die about 20 years earlier than people without schizophrenia. And although there are other risk factors like suicide, the major source of their dying too young is heart disease. Just like for the rest of us. So people with schizophrenia are at a high risk of heart disease. They're at a high risk for a number of reasons. There's high rates of smoking, obesity, type 2 diabetes. All of those contribute to a risk for heart disease and antipsychotic medications. So for example, for the brother with clozapine, there is a relatively small risk of diseases of a side effect that affects the heart muscle. And my suspicion is that that's what led to his death. For the other brother, it was unclear, but there were, multiple risk factors for it. It's important to point out for families or for people taking antipsychotics that if you look at mortality rates among people with schizophrenia, mortality is lowest in people who remain on their antipsychotic drugs, even though antipsychotic drugs can contribute to weight gain and other things. And clozapine, which is actually the most effective antipsychotic drug, if you look at rates of mortality among people with schizophrenia, it's associated with the lowest risk of dying. So it's a very difficult balance. I think quality psychiatric treatment would be managing, at least now, less so years ago when the Galvin brothers were treated. Psychiatrists should be managing things like weight and diabetes risk and other factors.
Do you think that there's, first of all, is there any new drugs in the pipeline? Where are we on research? And
well, the bad news is there really haven't been, although a number of antipsychotics have become available during the past 70 years since the first one was discovered. Only one of them has an advantage, and that's clozapine. And that's probably about 40 years old, so it's really not that new. There's a number of drugs that are coming out there. They have different mechanisms. They seem relatively promising. A lot of the focus is on drugs that are effective for the components of schizophrenia. For example, drugs that could treat the impairments in cognitions, the problem in memory and attention that really plague people early in the illness, and also medications that could be added to improve motivation, because people with schizophrenia oftentimes can become apathetic and withdrawn and disinterested in things that previously interested them. So I think the two things are, there's some progress, but unfortunately nothing that's going to change in the next year or two that I think is going to have a large change in the course of schizophrenia.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Lindsay, we're so glad that you're here. Thank you so much for, first of all, for sharing your family story with the world through Bob's incredible book. We are so grateful to you. I think the entire mental health community owes you a great debt of gratitude, because it's books like this that can change the conversation and raise awareness about mental illness and what it's like for the entire family. So when you were growing up, so much attention was given to your brothers who were ill. How did that make you feel, and how did it affect you? And did you ever worry that, as Bob said in his introduction, that it might happen to you?
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And of course, my enormous gratitude also goes to Robert Kolker for taking this task on. It's a big project with a big family and very complicated, and he has really done it with, like you said, enormous compassion. So first, I want to thank you for having me, and I want to thank Robert Kolker for telling our story. Growing up in a family with 6 schizophrenic brothers is certainly very, very challenging. My parents had to spend a lot of time trying to help them. And I think that predominantly the rest of us that were not affected worked really hard at whatever it was we were doing. We tried to really do well in school and do well in sports and maintain a normality about ourselves. I think that when you're a child in that kind of environment, you work really hard at creating a mask so that you can go out and face the world every day. You can go to kindergarten. You can go to your soccer practice or your ballet class and try to appear and be as quote unquote normal as you can, because you see that as your saving grace, really. And I think my parents were really fantastic at providing opportunity for all of us in that way. We always had, ballet class and soccer practice and art classes. And I think they worked really hard at trying to provide opportunity for all of us to get out of the home and away from the illness as much as possible, while at the same time trying to care for those that were not well. There was always the fear. I think as children we perceived mental illness as severe emotions. I think as a child, you just saw that there was anger and there was severe sadness in these folks that were struggling. And so I think a lot of us really worked hard at not having extreme emotions. We really spent a great amount of time trying to suppress our frustrations and our anger and just trying to make life easier for our parents. I think that, we didn't want to create more trouble for them. So I think that it was certainly challenging, but at the same time, I think that my parents did a great job of trying to manage both scenarios.
Has telling your story helped with your own personal recovery? or it sounds like you have been so resilient through this entire saga. And, but I'm just wondering, there must have been some recovery that you had to go through. Can you?
Well, my recovery started when I was 19. So I'm almost 55. Can't believe that. But I started therapy when I was 19 years old. And so my recovery and my road in recovery has been a long, long time coming. And I think that the book is really a culmination of that recovery, more than the telling of the story being a part of that process. Certainly the book, it has, you know, your process is your whole life. I mean, there's never an end to it, I think, when, and for anybody, whether you're a family like ours or just the general public, growing and changing and evolving are part of life. And certainly having shared this story with the world, to me, seems sort of like the crown and the jewel. Or the jewel in the crown, right? The jewel in the crown. That's how it goes. That was one of my mom's favorite sayings. But it's a lifelong process. And I spent, you know, many, many years from 19 and until now in therapy. And I'm really grateful to Louise Silver, my therapist at CU Boulder, who I started with when I was 19 and continued on with until I was 45 and moved out of Boulder. And then I picked up with Tina Fleshman, and she's still my therapist today and helps me through the challenges that I have currently with my family and caring for my brothers and helping my other siblings manage the challenge of the book. I think the book has been a challenge for all of us in many different ways. So I think that therapy is really, really important for folks that have siblings. And I highly encourage folks.
How are your brothers doing today? Can you share that with us?
Well, my brothers that are well are awesome. They all have lovely families and lovely children, and we have a new grandchild, Henry, who's adorable. And they all
Congratulations.
They all have really, really happy and fulfilling lives and have had. My brothers that are, my three brothers that are still alive, that are not well, are pretty severely disabled. My brother Don lives in an assisted living facility in Colorado Springs, and my brother Peter lives in an assisted living facility as well. We're very, very blessed for those two to be in the care of really great people. They do their psychiatric care as outpatient, so these are long-term care facilities that manage a lot of different people with different challenges. My brother Don's facility has fairly young people in it, Vietnam vets that are disabled, and so they're mixed into a large variety of people's disabilities. And so my mom worked really hard at getting both of those brothers into those facilities. On the other hand, my brother Matthew has not been hospitalized since he was originally diagnosed at 22 years old. He has spent his life living independently, and his physical health has started to fail as a result of heart disease. He's, what would he be now, 62? And heart disease and type 2 diabetes, just as Dr. Marder had said. And we're having a very, very difficult time getting him placed. He has been struggling with mental health issues. They tried to do a change of medication off the clozapine, which caused his schizophrenia symptoms to come back in full. Really, really, really has had a terrible 3 months. He has now been sitting in a medical hospital. Thank you, University of Colorado Health Sciences, for keeping him and trying to help him get stabilized. This is one piece that I just really have to share, is that these folks with schizophrenia show up in emergency rooms all the time. Our city streets are the hospital wards for a lot of these people. And they're going to emergency rooms and they're being turned away. They're being sent home with medical conditions. Because they're schizophrenic, they're unable to convey to the doctors what exactly is wrong. And as a result, they get sent home and their medical conditions are not treated. There is a condition that 50% of schizophrenics suffer from, and it's called anosognosia. And I'm going to ask Dr. Marder to explain it a little better, but the way I perceive it is it's like Alzheimer's. People with Alzheimer's don't know they have Alzheimer's. 50% of people with schizophrenia don't have a clear understanding that they are ill. And I'm going to actually turn it over to Dr. Marder because I think he can better explain this condition and can maybe help some families, people in the criminal justice system, and even some practitioners understand why people with schizophrenia find it hard to get treatment.
Yeah, one of the problems is that, and being a physician, it's very troubling, is that oftentimes people with schizophrenia, they don't understand that they have an illness. They lack insight. And whereas people who have rheumatoid arthritis or other illnesses, they feel pain, or people with depression feel sorrow, people with schizophrenia don't come to a doctor asking for help. It's other people around them. And this was very prevalent, Lindsay, in your family, with your brothers not appreciating the fact that they have an illness. And I would say, of calls that I get every week from families, most of them are, how do I get my son or daughter into treatment? And it's a dilemma. I think one of the goals of early treatment, I don't know if this makes sense to you, Lindsay, is how can we get somebody to take ownership of their illness so that it's not their mother who's telling them they need treatment, or their wife or friends, that they accept it themselves. And I think that becomes, for some, a learning experience that can take sometimes years, hopefully less than that. The positive side is, and this is very evident in a book by Ellen Sachs, who says that once she stopped struggling with the fact that she opposing the doctors who wanted to put her on medication and accepted it, that it was incredibly liberating, that no longer did her illness define who she was, and that her illness became something separate from her that was treatable, and it really helped her life. And I've seen it with other people, but how to make that transition, it really requires a patient family and a physician who hopefully engages with the person, that every time they get ill, it should be a learning experience so that they could take better command of their lives. I don't know if that makes sense, Lindsay, as something that might have helped your brothers at times.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that goes to helping the family learn how to communicate with somebody with schizophrenia, which, if you don't mind my talking about, there's an organization called the LEAP Foundation, which helps train families, helps train practitioners, and helps train criminal justice folks on how to communicate with somebody with schizophrenia who is struggling with anosognosia, that they don't have an awareness that they have an illness. So I would highly encourage folks out there, if you're in this situation, or even if you're not and you know somebody that has schizophrenia, look into the LEAP organization. They provide really wonderful training for families on how to communicate.
Thank you. I know the hour is starting to get late, but I just want to ask Lindsay one last question, because about your children, Jack and Kate. Can you just tell us briefly about them and share what their interests are now?
Katie just graduated in neuroscience and psychology from the University of Colorado. If anyone's out there and has a lab that wants an undergraduate for a year or two while she decides where to go to graduate school, let us know. She wants to study schizophrenia. She wants to go into research. So she plans on going on to graduate school. And this has been a dream of hers since she was 13 or 14. This is nothing new. My son, Jack, is going into the mental health field as well, from a completely different angle. He is starting college in the fall, and he'll be studying psychology and wilderness therapy for troubled teens. So he's going into the field of being a therapist for kids. It's a great program that enables kids to get their undergrad, go be a guide in the wilderness, and then go back to get their master's to be a practitioner. So yeah, it's really excited. My Mimi would be over the moon. She would just be so excited that a couple of her grandkids have chosen to go into this field to help those that need so much help.
Well, that's a tribute to Mimi, and it's a tribute to you. Clearly, really exemplary parenting that your children have decided to go into the mental health field and try to help others improve their lives. And so I want to thank all of our panelists today. Lindsay, for sharing your personal story, and really so grateful to you. Dr. Marder, for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. And Bob, the gift of this book. This is a gift to everybody to all of society. There's so much to learn here from this family, and so much for people who either live with mental illness or have family members who do, but also the general public, so that we can just get rid of the stigma of mental illness, so people that live with it can get the treatment they need and deserve and live the best possible life that they can. So I thank you all. We have so many questions here, and because I'm a novice at Zoom, I am having, okay, I brought them up. Okay, we have our first question. I have 2 brothers with schizophrenia. My sister and I are not affected. In this book, only some of the males are affected, but not the 2 females. Is this generally the case with families with schizophrenia, that the males are affected and not the females? And I'm just going to throw that out to Dr. Marder or whoever would like to address that.
Well, I'm sure Bob asked that question to Linda Lisi. You know, schizophrenia is usually, it occurs in men and women at a similar rate. Men usually develop it earlier than women do, but I don't think that the genetics really bias it towards either men or women. I don't know what Linda Lisi might have told you about that.
Yeah, everything I saw in that gave men a very, very slight edge. Nothing to remark on. As far as Dr. DeLisi and the genetic research into the Galvins, there's an open question there. It is not a sex-dependent gene that they've targeted that might be the big player as far as the Galvins is concerned. That genetic mutation is on a gene that isn't sex-dependent, but that doesn't mean that it isn't somehow only transferred from one gender to another or skips genders, because apparently it comes from Mimi's side of the family and then only affects, so she's a carrier and then some of the boys get hit with it. The whole genetic aspect of this is very challenging. It seems to be more about who is born with a possible vulnerability to developing schizophrenia. It's not necessarily your fate isn't sealed the moment you're born. There's a lot more that can happen, but families that have that vulnerability may really need to have some extra help medically. I want to say something really quickly about hope. I smiled listening to Lindsay because as I was explaining the book I was working on to friends and others over many years, they said, that sounds so sad. And I kept saying, no, there's a lot of hope here. There really is. And certainly the medical outlook for schizophrenia right now is very challenging, but there's a lot of work to be done outside of medicine with the stigma and with awareness and with early intervention that there is hope, I believe. Sorry, back to the questions. I didn't mean to digress.
No, not at all. Actually, the next question is for you, asking what writers that you admire and whose work you you admire.
I love a lot of narrative nonfiction, but for books like for this approach, for this particular book, I looked at Catherine Boo, who wrote Beyond the Beautiful Forevers, and Alex Kotlowitz, who wrote There Are No Children Here, and Adrienne Nicole LeBlanc, who wrote Random Family. These are all people writing about everyday people who are really in difficulties. And then a lot of books by Michael Lewis fold in very technical information in a way that keeps you turning the pages, and I wanted to try to do that as well.
Thank you. This is for Lindsay, and it's from Gil Hoffman, who is a UCLA psychiatry resident and schizophrenia researcher, and he's also a Friends of Semel scholar. I'm gonna toot our hat. We support research besides this Open Mind program. Would you be willing to share whether you remember some key moments in your interactions with psychiatrists and researchers that were powerful, both positive and negative? And what is your advice for young doctors and researchers? Thank you so much for fighting stigma and for the strength and courage both you and your family shared. Oop, unmute.
First, I have to say thanks for going into the field. Gratitude to you. My first memory as a small child in psychotherapy was one of the most horrible memories that I have. We went to CU Denver, and it was therapy. It wasn't psychiatry, it was therapy. And it was when my mother was blamed. And I remember it very, very clearly. I remember the color of the carpet. I remember the color of the chairs. And I remember my parents getting up and walking out because they were educated people. And they said, this is ridiculous. And unfortunately, as a result, my parents never supported therapy after that. So none of the well children were engaged in therapies at that time until we got into college. Some of the best memories, I'll say, are Dr. DeLisi telling my mom that wasn't true. And I think her joy, and, you know, she felt like, thank goodness there's somebody out there that is a scientist that is, you know, realizes that this disease is a disease of the brain. It's a disorder of the brain, and no parenting is causing this to happen. And of course, Bob Friedman. Dr. Friedman has been a friend of our families. He has cared for my brothers over the course of their lives, and he has really been a champion of hope for our family. I think his work with choline and prevention in utero of mental illness is really, really important, and provides lots of families, not just with schizophrenia, but whether it's autism or any kind of brain disorder of any kind. I think his work in early prevention is really fantastic. So hats off to Dr. DeLisi and Bob Friedman, and you, of course, Dr. Marder, for all you're doing.
Oh, so we're almost out of time, but one final question we have here. What do you think it's going, and this is for all of you, what do you think it's going to take for society to stop stigmatizing mental illness? We know the statistics, 46.6 million people are affected every year in this country alone. That's 1 in 4, and yet the stigma still remains. Books like Hidden Valley Road have a tremendous impact, but what else do you think we as a society could do better? What could we do better to help families, to help people who live with mental illness, and improve how we look, how we continue this reducing the stigma and raising awareness so people can lead the best lives they can? I'm going to open it up. That's for all of you to end on.
Well, I think we need to change the perception in society that when they hear about people with schizophrenia, people oftentimes think of people they see on the homeless people on the street, or people have done terrible things, where those are much more uncommon. We need to change the face so that people see people living with the illness successfully, and more of those people are actually writing books and talking about their illness. And I think that will help with stigma substantially.
Thank you. Bob, you've been thrown headfirst into this world. How do you see that?
Well, I think there have been great strides with stories by and about high functioning people with acute schizophrenia or schizophrenia related illnesses, like A Beautiful Mind, or like Ellen Sachs, The Center Cannot Hold, and they're inspiring in their way. But of course that conflicts with what Dr. Marder talks about, which is the stereotype of the person on the street who is seeing things and having delusions and hallucinations. So it seems a hard thing to get past. But on the other hand, I think back to the last 40 years, like from 1980 onward, and it seems as if these illnesses are sort of, they're falling like dominoes in terms of the stigma. Bipolar illness and depression and anxiety, all were really stigmatized, and people were in the closet about those, and they are less so now. And autism, I grew up with a family who really were very quiet about the autism in their family. Now people talk about it all the time. So it's possible that things can turn on a dime. Things can change very, very quickly, or I should say very, very slowly, and then suddenly very quickly.
I think that's a great note to end on, the hope for the future. Thank you, everyone. Get this book if you haven't read it yet, Hidden Valley Road. It is such an amazing book to read. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. Stay safe and well, and thank you.
Thank you to the Semel Institute.